Hey, Crossroads. Well, I don't know how many of you grew up when I did. I was a child of the late 70s and the 80s. Yeah. And during that time, there was this thing that came out that was so cool, and all my friends in our neighborhood had them. They were called garbage pail kids. So they were like baseball cards, and you would trade them, or you would have competitions to win them from other people, and every kid in our neighborhood had them. Well, one kid in our neighborhood was really bad at every competition, and so I tended to take every one of his garbage pail kids. He had mowed lawns and got money from his parents, and yet he was just losing this stuff to me right and left. And I was thrilled until one day his mom showed up at my house and talked to my mom and said, Jason has taken all of my kids, garbage pail kids, and I had to give them all back. And I remember sitting in bed that night thinking, they've stolen my garbage pail kid. Now I had a pile of them. I had a pile of them that sat next to my bed, but that wasn't enough because I wanted them all. And I would sit there in my room and just want my garbage pail kids, my precious. And I couldn't have them all. And I think it was the first time that really greed just kind of came out of me. This desire for everything and all of them. Today, that's what we're going to talk about, because Jesus is going to go at that thing that rises up out of us when we deal with money and possessions. Now, I know in our current climate, there are people going, Jason, do you have any idea how much I've lost in my portfolio or my retirement, or I've lost my job, or I've been furloughed? This is not a great time to talk about money and possessions. And I actually think it may be actually the perfect time. It's a really great test. See, because some of you over the last several months, as these things have happened, it's not that you're not sometimes worried, but you're fine. Because you have realized that money doesn't have a grip on your life, that your identity isn't found in a number at the end of a balance sheet. But for others, you almost don't feel simply a loss of net worth, you feel a loss of self-worth, and you've realized that money has a greater grip on you than you'd like. Jesus knew this was going to be a war within us, and so he tried to set us up for success during the Sermon on the Mount, the greatest sermon ever preached by the greatest teacher that ever preached, and 2,000 years later, it still holds up. And so here's what he says in Matthew chapter 6, starting in verse 19. Don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth or rust destroy, and where thieves cannot break in and steal. And then this is cool. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body, and if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. So if the light within you is darkness, how deep is the darkness? No one can serve two masters, since you will either hate one and love the other, or be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. And so that begs the first question of today is, where are you storing up your treasure? Is it heaven or is it earth? And listen, Christians can struggle with this. When you became a Christian, your Christian conversion didn't solve temptation in your life. It actually heightened temptation in your life. You have an enemy and a sin nature that is going to come after you to attempt to tear you away from those things that God has put into us as values, and those things that have transformed our life. And so he's going to say this isn't about what you have, it's about the view of what you have. In other words, I must have more garbage pail kids. Jesus is going to go, that's greed coming out of you, Jason. And so he expounds on this in Luke chapter 12. So I want to read you another text where he talks about this in the same language, but gives more of an illustration. And so there's a guy that he runs into. He says, someone from the crowd said to him. Now you maybe go like, who's this person that's talking to this guy? Well, in this context, in Luke 12, it's a young man who his parents have died and inheritance was split amongst him and his sibling. And he doesn't like the cut he got. And so he wants Jesus to do something about it. So here's what it says. Someone from the crowd said to him, Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. Friend, Jesus said to him, who appointed me as judge or arbitrator over you? And then he told them, watch out. Be on guard against greed, that darkness that rises up in you, because one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. And so this guy comes, and he's not seeking Jesus as the prized possession of his life. He wants Jesus to give him stuff. We see people still struggle with this today. When Jesus is not our most prized possession, there's a word for that in the Bible. It's called idolatry. And Jesus will go to war with anything that is sitting on the throne of your heart that is not named Jesus. That's the way he works. So this guy comes to Jesus. He wants Jesus to fix the problem, but Jesus wants to fix his heart. And so Jesus is going to give him, they're going to have a little story time with Jesus. We call it a parable. He's going to go, let me answer you with this story. And here's the story he tells. He says, a rich man's land was very productive. And he thought to himself, what should I do since I don't have anywhere to store my crops? I'll do this. He said, I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And then I'll store all my grain and all my goods there. And then I'll say to myself, you have many goods stored up for many years. Take it easy, eat, drink, and enjoy yourself. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life is demanded of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? And that's how it is for those who store up treasures for himself. In other words, treasures on earth, using the Matthew 6 language, and is not rich towards God, or in other words, does not store up treasures in heaven. And so Jesus in this says, be on guard against greed. Why? Well, let's learn a little bit about greed. The first thing I want you to hear is that greed is unquenchable. It is a thirst that you can never, ever, ever get rid of. You look at this guy in the story, his barns are filled. So the barns he has are already full. And there's a surplus. There's more to spare. And so in his world, even though what he built for has already been met and he has more, it's not enough. And don't misunderstand me, the Bible is not anti-saving. The Bible is anti-hoarding. There is a difference. Your bank account, your retirement, your clothes, your cars, those things are never going to tell you enough. So you have to have values that help direct you, because if you let your stuff tell you when to stop buying stuff, it's never going to happen, because greed is unquenchable. The second thing we learn about greed is that it is incredibly short-sighted. Most people have heard a story. It's this old parable in our world of a wealthy man who dies and passed away, and he had tons of money. And some guys in his local town see his accountant after his passing at a local restaurant, and they walk up to him and say, how much did he leave behind? And the accountant's answer is profound. All of it. See, it doesn't matter what that amount is, you leave all of it. See, the rich man, he builds bigger barns, and Jesus says, when you die, you're going to leave it all behind. This guy says he wants to take it easy and enjoy himself, which makes complete sense if this world is all there is. The Apostle Paul speaks to this in 1 Corinthians, where he says in chapter 15, verse 52, if the dead are not raised, then eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. He says, if there isn't life beyond this point, be greedy and have a great time. But Paul goes on, and Jesus goes on to say, but if the dead are raised, if there is life beyond this, then you're living very short-sighted. I remember when I was in Zambia, I went to Africa and got to go on a mission trip, and it was this really great experience. And when you're over there, just like many of you who have gone to mission trips before, you go over and you make an exchange rate. And so I'm over here in Zambia having a great time, and I transferred all my currency over into what's called kwacha. And kwacha was really cool because you got a lot of it. For like $1 American, it was like 60 kwacha. It was amazing. So you felt like you were flush with cash. And so you're over there having a great time. And then I came home, and I'll never forget this experience. We fly into New York, and I reached in my pocket, and I realized I had pocket full of kwacha. And so I went to the exchange counter in New York, and they said, I'm sorry, we don't exchange that here. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. Like, I have this much American dollars worth of kwacha. I want my money. And they said, yeah, you can't do that here at home. You have to do that in that other country. So now I have all this stuff. It's supposed to be worth something, but it was worthless. And what Jesus is saying is the same thing can happen. You sit here and you fill up our life on earth with stuff. And we forget that one day this is not where you're going to live. You're going to live here. And guess what? This has no value here. Your life is a short-term mission trip. You want to make sure that what you invest in has significance. Don't show up here with pockets full of kwacha. It has no value. And so that's what Jesus is desperately trying to teach this young man, is that your greed is short-sighted. Invest in the long term. The last thing about greed is that it's foolish. Jesus literally says, "You fool." Some of you guys know his name's Leo Tolstoy. He's a Russian novelist. He wrote many books, but he also wrote some short stories. And I ran into one. It was interesting. It's called "How Much Land Does a Man Need?" And so he tells the story of a guy who got the opportunity to march around a piece of land with a spade, like a small shovel. And if he from sunup to sundown, whatever he marked with this spade in this huge expanse of land, whatever he marked, as long as he got back to where he started, then he could have all that land. And so sunrise, he gets up and he is on running, on the move. He's digging up. He doesn't eat. He doesn't drink anything. He is just moving, and he goes around, and he actually covers the entire vast expanse of land. And right before the sun goes down, he gets back to where he started. And everybody is thrilled and claps and gets so excited. And then he drops dead of exhaustion. And Tolstoy says they buried him in 6 feet of ground, which answered the question, how much land does a man need? Like, that's a powerful illustration to me. This person, they spent their whole life looking for more, and in the end, it ended in their own destruction. And that's what Jesus is warning this guy of. So before I continue, I just simply want to say this. If you're not a Christian and you live with to take advantage of everything that you can right now today, I actually respect that, because you're being consistent to your values. What I do not respect, even in my own life, is when I say that Jesus has everything in my life, but I live like I'm chasing more garbage pail kids. And so we have to be very concerned or cautious about how we live. So the question that I would have is that how do you remove the power of greed? If this young man that Jesus is talking to in the book of Luke is consumed by this, how do you remove the power of it? And so here's what I want you to see, is I think that greed loses its power with 2 things. And the first one is contentment. The most misquoted verse of scripture in the Bible is Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And what we tend to think that means is that listen, if I can quote that verse, I can dunk a basketball. If I can quote that verse, I can fly. I can do whatever. Listen, there are things you can't do. I don't care how many times you quote this verse. It isn't the magic pixie dust that you sprinkle over your activity. There are things you can't do. This verse is not about that. It's not a sports verse. It's a contentment verse. If you go back to Philippians 4:11, what he's setting up is he says, I've learned to be content in whatever circumstances. I've learned the secret of being content. And he says, whether I'm well-fed or hungry, abundance or need, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. He's saying contentment doesn't come from what I have in this world. I am a treasured possession of Jesus Christ, flooded with his grace and forgiveness. That is my greatest possession, and I am his possession, and that is what brings contentment. That I look at Jesus and the Jesus that I receive, and I go, if nothing else, that's enough. And so the second thing that greed loses its power with is not just contentment, it's when we give generously. You're either storing up treasure for this world or treasure for the next. Let's go back to Matthew 6 for a minute. He says, don't store up treasure for yourself, treasures on earth, store up treasures in heaven. Where your treasure is, there your heart is. Now, that statement is counterintuitive. I don't know if you've thought much about it, but here's how we tend to give in our culture. In our culture, when something tugs our heartstrings, you see a video, you go to a program, and we go, oh, that pains me. I'll now send my treasure there because my heart has been tugged. Jesus actually says that in the kingdom, we give to the work of God first, and our heart then follows our treasure. So what he's setting up is that you will always ultimately love where you're generous. If you're generous to you, then you're going to love you. If you're generous to God, then you're going to fall deeply in love with his mission and his kingdom. One reason I believe so many people don't care much about God's kingdom is that they've never given anything to it, and therefore their heart has never followed. Generosity combats greed. Now, let's get real practical here for a moment as we kind of wrap up these thoughts. There are some things, and they'll appear on your screen for you here. There's some kind of levels that we go through in our financial life, and all of you will recognize some of them. We go through struggling, been there. We go through surviving, stability, security, and then surplus. Every single person watching this video is in one of those levels. And every one of us is asking another question, which is, how do I get to the next level? If you're struggling, you're desperate to get to survival. If you're surviving, you are desperate to get to stable. And no matter where you are, the answer to that question is the same. And these are all biblical answers. You need to do one of these 5 things, or do all of these 5 things, Spend less, avoid debt, build margin or save some, establish long-term goals, and give generously. Now, that is true whether you believe in God or not. Those things are important. See, your faith will always redefine your finances and how you manage them. And you go, well, I don't have faith, so that's not true. Actually, you're wrong. See, if you don't believe in God, that's a faith. Your faith is in yourself. And so that defines how you use your money. If you're a follower of Jesus, then your faith is in Him. And that should define how we manage and use our finances. Your finances are always defined by your faith. So Jesus, in this text, is not giving us a get rich with God formula. He's giving us a get right with God formula. And what he's saying is that the further down the road we look, the better your decisions will be today. So if you're just going, how do I get to lunch? Then you're going to have a very short-term view of your finances. If you're looking to, how do I get through the next month? Your decisions are going to get a little better. If you're looking at what does the next 5 years look like? Or how do I get to retirement? You'll make better decisions today. But if your view is literally to look to eternity, then you will make the absolute best decisions. But this truth gets settled in your soul. Jesus says you cannot serve, you cannot love, you cannot give your affection to both God and money. And so what he is really saying, and this is going to sound like an extreme statement, you can love God and have money. In other words, God can be the utmost in your life. God can be the primary thing in your life, and you can have money. But you cannot reverse those. You cannot love money and have God. In other words, you cannot make God your hope. You cannot make money your hope or your security. You cannot make it the utmost in your life and then have God. God does not share first place in your life. This is all about our eternity. You see what he's setting up here? You might wonder, why does Jesus talk about finances so much? Because for him, it's not about our finances. It's about what sits on the throne of our heart. And he knows that what sits there determines our eternity. And he loves us so much that he wants to make sure our eternity is secure. So he goes to war with any idol sitting on the throne of our heart that's not named Jesus. There's so much at stake. And so Jesus is going to teach us that when giving generously frees up our finances to impact his kingdom and to impact us. But greed freezes our finances and makes us cold. If you're going to be generous, you've got to embrace a couple of truths. And I think these are very important. And the first one is that God owns it all. We don't give to make God better. God is maxed out at his best all the time. We give to break the power of money in our life. That's why we give. Like the Bible says here, I want you to give a tenth. And a lot of us go, oh, I get to give God a tenth. That's his. 90% of his mine. That's not how this works. Giving God a tenth is like going to when I was a kid, going to Sam's on a Saturday morning where you get samples. The whole idea is when I get a taste of one thing, I want all of it. Because what Jesus actually says is, I don't want you to give a tenth to me. I want you to give 100% of it to me. That everything that I have belongs to him. And if I view life that way, now every decision I make will be about his resources and how to maximize his resources in my life, not mine. My daughter Caitlin, our whole family loves ice cream. But Caitlin has a particular ice cream that is her favorite. It is called Half Baked by Ben & Jerry's. And so I will never forget this happening. A couple months ago, I went to the freezer, opened the freezer, and there's this thing of half-baked ice cream, unopened. And so I asked a simple question. Whose ice cream is this? Occasionally, Crystal will go buy ice cream. Sometimes she'll buy some for me. And I was kind of, looking for some ice cream. And so I said, whose ice cream is this? And I hear from Caitlin's room, mine. You ever heard that from your kids? Mine. Mine. And now, in that moment, to be honest with you, all I wanted to do was open it and eat all of it while she watched. Like, that was what I really wanted to do in that moment, because she had forgotten some things. So she had forgotten that I provided it. Now, she may have paid for it with her own money, but the only reason she has money is because I don't charge her rent. The only reason she has the ability to get a job babysitting is because most of the time it comes from people within our church where her dad is the pastor. If she gets anywhere in her life, it's because we drive her there and pay for the gas. Whatever she's got, it comes from us. She forgot that I provided it. She also forgot that I didn't need her ice cream. Like, if I wanted to be real sarcastic about it, I could have gone to the store and I could have filled our freezer top to bottom with some Ben & Jerry's ice cream and ate every single one of them. I didn't need it. And then also she forgot that I could have took it. I mean, she's 17, I'm bigger than her. If I wanted it, I could have simply taken it away from her. But I don't want her to see me as a taker, because then what she'll do is protect, she'll collect, she'll hoard her stuff. I want her to see me as a giver, because it opens our relationship. And the same thing that Caitlin forgot about the ice cream is the same thing we forget about God. See, we forget that He provides it. Every single thing. If you're great at your job, you have gifts and talents that God gave to you. You're the air that you breathe, the life that you live, the talents you have, the resources you have at your disposal. Every single thing, God provided it. We also forget that He doesn't need it. Like, God's kingdom doesn't fall when you don't honor Him, but your kingdom will. See, if you build your own little kingdom apart from God, every single one of those kingdoms will collapse. But God's kingdom will always reign. He wants you to invest in the one kingdom that's going to last. He's protecting you, not coming after your stuff. And the last thing that we forget, again, like Caitlin, is He could take it. Go back to the story about the guy with the barns for a minute. He says, I'm going to build bigger barns. And Jesus reminds him, you fool. This very night, your soul will be required of you. In other words, we will all be generous with every single thing we have, either by choice or by death. It's all going to be given away. See, Jesus wants us to choose to be a giver and to see Him as a giver, because giving opens up the relationship. Look at the core verse that so many of us anchor our faith to, John 3:16. God so loved the world that He what? Gave. He models generosity. He doesn't give 10% to us. He gives Himself to us. Jesus has been so generous, and because of that, we're generous too. So we got to remember that God owns it all, but then also, if you're going to be generous, you got to remember that God is first. Proverbs 3:19 says, honor the Lord your God with your possessions and first fruits. In other words, God's work gets first priority, and the person that taught me most in my life was my papa. I watched him work hard. He had 5 daughters. He had some tough days, but he always gave to the work of God. Sometimes at his local church, sometimes at other things God called him to. Whatever that was that God was putting on his heart, he gave. And I'll never forget, I was preaching his funeral, because we would often go like, Papa, are you thinking about retirement? Are you thinking about retirement? Are you thinking about retirement? Papa, don't give that away. You got to think about your future. And I'll never forget sitting there, and I was preaching his funeral, and in that moment, I felt like God whispered to me, he's retiring just fine. See, he got to be a part of God's kingdom here, and also experience the benefit there. Here, he got to see people baptized. He got to see marriages succeed, students discover their identity. He got to see addictions break and lives be changed. And for him, it was absolutely worth 100% of what he invested in it. See, the stuff that I'm giving will always outlast the stuff that I buy. And my papa understood that. And so here we get to see the fruits of a relationship with Jesus, but there we actually get the fruit of being with Jesus. And my papa knew that, and he got both. And the last thing that I want you to learn, if you're going to be generous, is when God is first, I can afford to give. See, whatever is last in your life always gets the pressure. Let me explain this to you in this way. Now, I got some money right here. It is not real for those of you watching around here. This is just some fake money, but I want to illustrate something for you. Whatever you do last will always get the pressure. So here's the way this is supposed to work. I give whatever God's called me to give to God, and then I can save some, and then I start to make decisions about my lifestyle. Now, I don't know about you, but I always run out of money. And at some point in my life, I always run out of money. And so when you run out of money, whatever you've done last is where the pressure is. So now I have to make decisions. So I have to make lifestyle adjustments in order to survive on what was left before I ran out. The other option is to do it this way. The other option is to start by giving to my lifestyle. And this is how most of us work. So we give to lifestyle first. And I want a really good lifestyle. I got the house, the car, maybe got a boat, and there's nothing wrong with these things in and of themselves. I go to the movies a lot, I eat out, and you know what? You go, I got a lot. I like shoes, I like clothes, I want to do these things. And then, you know what? I've got to think about retirement. And then we go, oops. Well, I don't have a lot left here. Sometimes I have nothing left here. See, whatever you choose to give to last will always get the pressure. And so instead of having a living adjustment, I have a giving adjustment. That's what I end up choosing to do. And I lay out on God because He wasn't first. And whatever's last gets the pressure because I'm always going to run out of money. See, it all depends on the order that you start in. And here's the key. You decide the order. If God is first, I can always afford to give. And this is something I hear from people a lot. Jason, one day I'm going to be generous. When I make X number of dollars. And can I just tell you, it doesn't start when you make money. How much money you have is irrelevant. It starts with your heart. One of our missional partners in India, about a year and a half ago, we were giving money over there. We gave $500 to some needs over there. What we didn't know is that one of our missional partners there, she desperately needed surgery and had been in pain for quite some time. And so we gave her money and we were like, hey, use this for however you need. There were other people that were starving and hungry in her community. And so instead of taking care of herself, she gave it all away. Now that's generosity. That is a giving spirit. We were giving to her out of abundance. She gave out of poverty. Now, we were blessed that we were able to send some more money ahead and she was able to get the surgery and has recovered well. But I hope that you understand the point. Giving generously isn't about the amount. It's about your heart. A few weeks ago, Caitlin decided to go get ice cream again. And she did. And she looked at me and she goes, hey, Dad, you want some ice cream? I said, I sure do. And in that moment, she got close to me and I put my arm around her and I gave her a kiss on the head. See, when she had her fist clenched towards me, our relationship was closed, but the moment she opened it, our relationship opened it. She could ask me for 50 gallons of Ben & Jerry's in that moment and I would have given it to her. Our view of money and stuff is affecting our relationship with God. That's why Jesus wants to give us a new perspective on money and our stuff. It's about your heart, and what He wants is for you to draw close to Him and to trust Him so you can go get some ice cream.